Darklings. Welcome back to the Deadly Digest. I'm your co-host, Delaney Bartlett, true crime and horror writer.
I'm your co-host, C.F. Roberts, just guy who does whatever.
Tell us who we're talking about today.
Well, today we're talking about a killer who terrorized Northern California between the late 60s and the early 70s. The case was never solved. He was never apprehended. Claimed at the end of the day 37 victims, although investigators only agree on 7, 2 of whom survived. We're talking the myth, the legend, the big kahuna, the Zodiac.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of requests from friends and viewers to cover this, so we're going into it. So, as Chuck said, there's only 7 that investigators, law enforcement for sure confirm were killed or attacked by the Zodiac. So for those of you who might not be as familiar with the details, I'm going to go through it a little bit. So first we have David Arthur Faraday, who was 17, and his girlfriend Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16. They were shot and killed December 20th, 1968. They were off Lake Herman Road in Benicio, California, in this area that was kind of known as the Lover's Lane. Their bodies were discovered by a neighbor later that night. It was investigated, but no leads ever developed. It was, kind of unsolved for a while. But the writer, who we'll talk about a little bit later, Paul Avery, looked at the evidence, and he deduced that another car had pulled up to their car, and likely the 2 were ordered out of the car. Jensen seemed as though he had exited first, and Faraday, was halfway out. The killer shot him in the head and then shot Jensen 5 times in the back as she was running away. She was found about 28 feet away from the car. So then the killer drove off. So that's all the information that anybody had at that point, was kind of a basic what happened. Then we have July 4th, 1969, Michael Renaud Majot, I hope I'm saying that right.
Sounds about right.
He was 19, and his girlfriend Darlene Elizabeth Farron, who was 22. They were at a parking lot off Blue Springs Park, which was really only about 4 miles from the previous Faraday Jensen murders. This was in Vallejo, California. After this attack, Majot actually survived. And this is what he told police, that they were sitting in Farron's car, and a second car drove into the lot behind them, or alongside them, kind of parked next to them, but then almost immediately drove away. And then about 10 minutes later, the car came back, and it parked behind them this time. Then the driver of that car got out and had a flashlight, so they were kind of blinded by the flashlight. And he approached the passenger side of Farron's car, and they saw he had what looked like a 9mm Luger. The killer directed the flashlight into their eyes before shooting them, and he fired 5 times. Both victims were hit. Several bullets actually passed through Majot and into Farron. The killer walked away from the car, but then he heard Majot, sort of moaning in pain, and came back and shot each of them twice more before he drove off. So this is the first survivor that we have of one of these attacks. And then the next day, this man called the police, told them about the murders, and took credit for them. So we have the first contact that we know of. The call was traced back to a payphone that was only blocks away from the Vallejo Police Department. And then the next month after these attacks is when the killer started sending letters and cryptograms to the press. August 1st, 1969, he sent 3 nearly identical letters to the 3 biggest papers in the area. That was the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. The person who wrote the letters took credit for the shootings at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. So now we know both of these double murders he's claiming credit for. Each of these letters included 1/3 of a 408 symbol cryptogram, which the killer claimed would reveal his identity. He demanded that they be printed in the papers, or he would cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, and then move on to kill again until I, quote, end up with 12 people over the weekend. So the Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4, and also printed alongside an article from a police official saying they weren't really sure that this was actually the guy and that they wanted more information. But the threatened murders didn't happen, so that was good. And all 3 parts of the cryptogram were eventually published. Then on August 7th, 1969, another letter was received at the San Francisco Examiner with the salutation, "Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." So this is the first time that he's using this name for himself. The letter was a response to the police officer's request for more details. He wanted to prove that he was the one who killed Faraday, Jensen, and Farron. So in this letter, Zodiac included details about the murders that had not been released to the public, including like the brand name of the shell casings and details about the crime scene. And he told the police once they crack these codes, quote, "they will have me." And then the next day, a history teacher and his wife, who just liked puzzles and cryptograms, sat down and cracked the 408 symbol cryptogram. And it read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and I have killed and will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." And then a series of just random letters, which has never been decoded or figured out what the meaning might be. Then we have September 27th, 1969, Brian Calvin Hartnell, age 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22. This is probably the one that most people recognize. They were picnicking on the shores of Lake Berryessa in Napa County, California, when they were approached by a man in a strange costume. He was wearing like a black executioner-style hood and then sort of like a black bib, and it had about a 3x3 symbol of a circle with a cross through it, like a crosshairs on a gun. And he told them he just escaped from some prison in Colorado or Montana and told them he needed to steal their car. He had pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline with him already. He told Shepard to tie up Hartnell, and then he tied up Shepard, the girl, and checked Hartnell and saw he hadn't been tied up very well, so he tightened up Hartnell's bonds. And then he stabbed them repeatedly. Hartnell had 6 stab wounds and Shepard had 10. Hartnell actually survived, although Shepard died. But she was still conscious when first responders got there, and she provided a detailed description of their attacker. A white man, about 5 feet 11 inches tall, weighing more than 170 pounds, with combed, greasy brown hair, and he had clip-on glasses over his hood. As a glasses wearer, I can kind of relate to that. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to see if you're going to commit murder properly, right? Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about this, too, is that when police got there, they saw written on her car door, Vallejo, 12-20-68, 7-4-69, 6:30 by knife. He also called the Napa County Sheriff's Department afterwards to report a murder, and then he said, no, a double murder, and claimed to be the person who had done it. The call was traced back to a payphone only blocks away, again, from the police department. And the receiver was still hanging, still swinging from the phone, the actual phone part. And they were able to get a palm print off of it, but they were never able to match it to anyone. And then the final that we know of murder that can be attributed to this guy was Paulie Stein. He was a 29-year-old cab driver, and he was shot and killed October 11th, 1969 in Presidio Heights in San Francisco. Some teenagers had been having a party and saw through the window. What they saw was a white man who looked like he was wiping down the car, and then he like leaned inside and was like doing something to the cab driver, and they gave the description, which was very similar to the description that Shepard had given of their attackers. But for some reason, when it went out over the wires to the cops, they said it was a black man. And so this was another interesting part of this, is that a couple of police officers were headed to the crime scene to respond, and they encountered a white man walking basically away from the crime scene. He didn't seem like he was in a hurry, didn't seem suspicious at all, and they didn't think to stop him or question him because it said it was a black man on their bolo. So he just walked away. And days after this attack, Zodiac sent more letters and cryptograms to the police and law enforcement. And he described the fact that he encountered the police right after he shot Stein and kind of made fun of the police for letting him essentially just walk right on by.
Yeah, I believe they had this this quote about the fun I had while you were busy racing your motorcycles around.
Exactly, yeah. Which, to be honest, that was
Yeah.
kind of stupid.
Good call.
Yeah. So, but then we have this really interesting, what I think is the creepiest Zodiac attack. There's a woman named Kathleen Johns. She was 7 months pregnant. She had her 12-month-old baby, or 10-month-old baby with her. March 22nd, 1970. She was driving to Petaluma to go visit her mother, and she said a car came up behind her and was flashing its lights and honking its horn. So she pulled over, and a man came out and told her that her right rear tire was wobbling, like maybe the lug nuts were loose. And he offered to tighten the lug nuts for her, and so she said okay. So he went back there and did something to her tire and then drove off. And as she went to drive off, like almost immediately her tire, the entire wheel came off. Well, here comes back that helpful man. Oh, it must have been worse than I thought. Let me give you a ride to a filling station. And she said she was already starting to feel a little bit suspicious, but she didn't know what else to do. So she gathered up her baby and she got inside the guy's car. And she said that they actually passed a filling station, and he started sort of driving around on these back roads, and she was getting more and more frightened. And it's different that what she told the cops versus what was reported in the media later. She didn't say this to the cops at the time, but media reported later. She said that the man said to her, "Before I kill you, I'm going to throw your baby out the window." And so at some point he stopped, like for a stop sign or something, and she, with her baby in her arms, just like threw herself out of the car and like ran into a field and hid. He looked for her with a flashlight and said, "I'm not going to hurt you," but she stayed hidden. He finally drove off, and then she, went back up to the road and managed to flag somebody down and went to the cops and reported it. And when she was in the police station giving her report of what happened, she saw the composite sketch of the Zodiac killer, and she said that was him. So that was really kind of, in my mind, one of the creepiest attacks. I'm glad that she lived, but whoo.
Okay, so in addition to a lot of the obvious victims and let's say canonical victims, as it were, there were a series that suspected but not confirmed, and I'm going to go into those. First of all, there was Robert Domingos, who was 18, and Linda Edwards, who was 17, and they were shot and killed in June 1963 on a beach near Gaviota. I hope I'm getting that right. Thought by police, I guess kind of later down the road, to have similarities to the Lake Berryessa attack.
And that's pretty early, 1963.
Yeah, that's very early. Cheri Jo Bates, 18 years old, from Riverside, California. She was stabbed to death and nearly decapitated on October 30, 1966 at Riverside College, where she was a student. Possibly tied to the Zodiac, made 4 years later due to a tip from the San Francisco Chronicle, again, Paul Avery. The guy who killed her left some letters, sent some letters to the newspaper and also to, what a swell guy, her grieving father, and they were known to be very similar in style and tone to what would become the Zodiac. We'll be talking more about the Cheri Jo Bates murder in episode 2. Then there was also Donna Lass, who was 25 and last seen on September 6, 1970, hitchhiking around State Line, Nevada, and she disappeared. She was never found and was possibly identified by Zodiac as a victim via a postcard he sent in. Other stuff of importance, yeah, we've gone over the fact the newspapers received these numerous letters and cryptograms from the Zodiac detailing the many killings, taunting the police and claiming he'd killed again, and a lot of this communication continued through 1970.
Actually, it continued even later than that.
Later than that.
There was a lot.
There were a lot, and then there were considered to be a lot of copycats and forgeries,
Yeah.
and that's another one we're going to get more into later on.
Yeah.
Late in this whole thing, he picked up a communication with the famous lawyer Melvin Belli. After the Stein murder, Zodiac demanded that a prominent lawyer, either Belli or F. Lee Bailey, contact him and appear to talk with him on a local TV show, AM San Francisco. Anyway, Belli took the bait, and a caller called in several times and claimed his name was Sam, and went on and on about how he needed help. And Belli said that he would meet with him and possibly represent him. He set up a meeting with him and wound up being a no-show, so that wound up going nowhere.
Was that, I mean, I kind of heard, and it was on the movie, maybe we'll talk about it more, didn't that turn out to be a hoax, or?
I don't know whether it turned out to be a hoax, but basically he strung him along.
Right.
And, nothing ever materialized.
Yeah.
Could have been a hoax.
Yeah. Oh, and then the cipher, the infamous cipher.
Oh, yes, the cipher known as the Z340. Infamous uncracked cryptogram sent by the Zodiac. Years have gone by, decades have gone by at this point, with people not able to crack this last cryptogram he sent. And he claimed that, once again, my name will be revealed if you manage to crack this. Well, it's looking as though somebody did finally crack it, or at least crack part of this. Anyway, this was all attached to a History Channel series that came about in 2017, and there have been rumors of a second season. Who knows? It's largely like speculation and go-go.
Yeah.
Treading over old territory, and at this point I get to put on my Henry Silva, Amazon Women on the Moon hat and say, bullshit or not.
Well, I wasn't able to watch all of it because you're right. It was a lot of, like, the History Channel has a pattern of, oh, we're going to crack this historical mystery or unsolved case. And they go through, hours and hours of just hype and retreading what the thing is and facts that are already known. And then in the end, it's either like little or nothing that they actually solve or discover.
Yeah.
But in this case, I was able to watch the final episode because I was like, I'm just going to cut through all the stuff we already know.
Yeah.
And apparently they had the help of a supercomputer and this crack team of, analysis and cryptographers.
Yeah, FBI cryptographers and whatnot. And someone finally cracked the code.
At least partially.
At least partially.
Yeah.
Story behind it is they cracked the first paragraph or the first 6 lines or whatever, 6 to 8 lines, and the middle of it appears to be gibberish and has no connection to the first part. And then the last part does reveal a name. But when you look at what they crack, it does read an awful lot like the Zodiac.
Yeah, and they took it to a very respected FBI cryptographer who said, yeah, this looks like you've probably done it. This looks legitimate. So, you know, I think it's probably legit, but it's only half of the cipher, so.
Yeah, the other half, either he threw in complete gibberish to throw everybody off, or there's a code within the code.
Yeah.
But he basically does a lot of the usual rambling like the Zodiac did. And then down toward the end, there is a name attached to it. And the name, interestingly enough, is Richard M. Nixon, misspelled, which
Yeah.
The famous Zodiac misspelling.
Yeah.
But if this is real, and if they have indeed cracked it or cracked part of it, what we found out is that the Zodiac for decades now has been trolling everybody,
Yeah.
which, I don't know, given everything in the past, would not surprise me at all.
Right. Yeah. So, like we were talking about the communications earlier, they kind of petered out. Like the last one that they got for sure, that they're saying for sure was from the Zodiac, was in January of 1974. And it was, again, his typical rambling. He praised The Exorcist as the best satirical comedy that I've ever seen. It included a snippet from a verse from the Mikado and an unusual symbol that nobody has really ever discovered what could mean. It could just be something in his own mind that no one will ever know except him. And he gave, again, the scorecard that he likes to do, me 37, SFPD 0. So the trail pretty much did go cold after that. And there are some experts who think that a serial killer, if they go on long enough and they aren't caught, some of them will just sort of burn out or maybe age out, sort of like the Golden State Killer. Once they get to an age when they feel like they can't physically overpower their victims anymore, or for whatever reason, they will stop. And that seems to have been what has happened. We don't know. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the suspects, the investigation, and all that in part 2. So be sure and come back next week for part 2 of the Zodiac on the Deadly Digest.